I did not speak to her till she spoke to me, and I did not go near the place. I met her in the road." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. She said, 'Are you the poor boy who had to bring the heavy load for market?' And she looked at my boots and said they would not keep my feet dry if it came on wet because they were so cracked. I told her I lived with my mother, and we had enough to do to keep ourselves, and that's how it was. And she said then, 'I'll come and bring you some better boots and see your mother. She gives away things to other folks in the meads besides us.'" Mrs. Lodge was by this time close to the door, not in her silk, as Rhoda had seen her in the bedchamber, but in a morning hat and a gown of common light material, which became her better than silk. On her arm she carried a basket. The impression remaining from the night's experience was still strong. Brooke had almost expected to see the wrinkles, the scorn, and the cruelty on her visitor's face. She would have escaped an interview had escape been possible. There was, however, no back door to the cottage, and in an instant the boy had lifted the latch to Mrs. Lodge's gentle knock. "I see I have come to the right house," said she, glancing at the lad and smiling, "but I was not sure till you opened the door." The figure and action were those of the phantom, but her voice was so indescribably sweet, her glance so winning, her smile so tender, so unlike that of Rhoda's midnight visitant, that the latter could hardly believe the evidence of her senses. She was truly glad that she had not hid it away in sheer aversion, as she had been inclined to do. In her basket Mrs. Lodge brought the pair of boots that she had promised to the boy, and other useful articles. At these proofs of a kindly feeling towards her and hers, Rhoda's heart reproached her bitterly. This innocent young thing should have her blessing and not her curse. When she left them a light seemed to have gone from the dwelling. 2 days later she came again to know if the boots were fitted, and less than a fortnight after that paid Rhoda another call. On this occasion the boy was absent. "I walk a good deal," said Mrs. Lodge, "and your house is the nearest outside our own parish. I hope you are well. You don't look quite well." Rhoda said she was well enough, and indeed, though the paler of the two, there was more of the strength that endures in her well-defined features and large frame than in the soft-cheeked young woman before her. The conversation became quite confidential as regarded their powers and weaknesses, and when Mrs. Lodge was leaving, Rhoda said, "I hope you will find this air agree with you, madam, and not suffer from the damp of the water-meads." The younger one replied that there was not much doubt of it, her general health being usually good. "Though now you remind me," she added, "I have one little ailment which puzzles me. It's nothing serious, but I cannot make it out." She uncovered her left hand and arm, and their outline confronted Rhoda's gaze as the exact original of the limb she had beheld and seized in her dream. Upon the pink round surface of the arm were faint marks of an unhealthy colour, as if produced by a rough grasp. Rhoda's eyes became riveted on the discolorations. She fancied that she discerned in them the shape of her own 4 fingers. "How did it happen?" she said mechanically. "I cannot tell," replied Mrs. Lodge, shaking her head. "One night when I was sound asleep, dreaming I was away in some strange place, a pain suddenly shot into my arm there, and was so keen as to awaken me. I must have struck it in the daytime, I suppose, though I don't remember doing so." She added, laughing, "I tell my dear husband that it looks just as if he had flown into a rage and struck me there. Oh, I dare say it will soon disappear." "Ha ha ha! Yes, on what night did it come?" Mrs. Lodge considered and said it would be a fortnight ago on the morrow. "When I awoke I could not remember where I was," she added, "till the clock striking 2 reminded me." She had named the night and the hour of Rhoda's spectral encounter, and Brooke felt like a guilty thing. The artless disclosure startled her, and she did not reason on the freaks of coincidence, and all the scenery of that ghastly night returned with double vividness to her mind. "Oh, can it be," she said to herself when her visitor had departed, "that I exercise a malignant power over people against my will?" She knew that she had been slyly called a witch since her fall, but never having understood why that particular stigma had been attached to her, it had passed disregarded. Could this be the explanation, and had such things as this ever happened before? Chapter 4. A Suggestion. The summer drew on, and Rhoda Brooke almost dreaded to meet Mrs. Lodge again, notwithstanding that her feeling for the young wife amounted well nigh to affection. Something in her own individuality seemed to convict Rhoda of crime. Yet a fatality sometimes would direct the steps of the latter to the outskirts of Holmstoke whenever she left her house for any other purpose than her daily work, and hence it happened that their next encounter was out of doors. Rhoda could not avoid the subject which had so mystified her, and after the first few words she stammered, "I hope your arm is well again, ma'am?" She had perceived with consternation that Gertrude Lodge carried her left arm stiffly. "No, it is not quite well. Indeed, it is no better at all. It is rather worse. It pains me dreadfully sometimes." "Perhaps you had better go to a doctor, ma'am." She replied that she had already seen a doctor. Her husband had insisted upon her going to one. But the surgeon had not seemed to understand the afflicted limb at all. He told her to bathe it in hot water, and she had bathed it, but the treatment had done no good. "Will you let me see it?" said the milkwoman. Mrs. Lodge pushed up her sleeve and disclosed the place, which was a few inches above the wrist. As soon as Rhoda Brooks saw it, she could hardly preserve her composure. There was nothing of the nature of a wound, but the arm at that point had a shrivelled look, and the outline of the 4 fingers appeared more distinct than at the former time. Moreover, she fancied that they were imprinted in precisely the relative position of her clutch upon the arm in the trance, the first finger towards Gertrude's wrist, and the 4th towards her elbow. What the impress resembled seemed to have struck Gertrude herself since their last meeting. "It almost looks like finger marks," she said, adding with a faint laugh, "My husband says it is as if some witch or the devil himself has taken hold of me there and blasted the flesh." Rhoda shivered. "That's fancy," she said hurriedly. "I wouldn't mind it if I were you." "I shouldn't so much mind it," said the younger, with hesitation, if I hadn't a notion that it makes my husband dislike me. No, love me less. Men think so much of personal appearance." "Some do. He for one." "Yes, and he was very proud of mine at first." "Keep your arm covered from his sight." "He knows a disfigurement is there." She tried to hide the tears that filled her eyes. "Well, ma'am, I earnestly hope it will go away soon." And so the milkwoman's mind was changed anew to the subject by a horrid sort of spell as she returned home. The sense of having been guilty of an act of malignity increased, affect as she might to ridicule her superstition. In her secret heart, Rhoda did not altogether object to a slight diminution of her successor's beauty, by whatever means it had come about, but she did not wish to inflict upon her physical pain. For though this pretty young woman had rendered impossible any reparation which Lodge might have made Rhoda for his past conduct, everything like resentment at the unconscious usurpation had quite passed away from the elder's mind. If the sweet and kindly Gertrude Lodge only knew of the scene of the bedchamber, what would she think? Not to inform her of it seemed treachery in the presence of her friendliness, but tell she could not of her own accord, neither could she devise a remedy. She mused upon the matter the greater part of the night, and the next day, after the morning milking, set out to obtain another glimpse of Gertrude Lodge if she could, being held to her by a gruesome fascination. By watching the house from a distance, the milkmaid was presently able to discern the farmer's wife in a ride she was taking alone, probably to join her husband in some distant field. Mrs. Lodge perceived her, and cantered in her direction. "Good morning, Rhoda," Gertrude said when she had come up. "I was going to call." Rhoda noticed that Mrs. Lodge held the reins with some difficulty. "I hope—" "The bad arm," said Rhoda. "They tell me there is possibly one way by which I might be able to find out the cause, and so perhaps the cure of it," replied the other anxiously. "It is by going to some clever man over in Egdon Heath. They did not know if he was still alive, and I can't remember his name at this moment, but they said that you knew more of his movements than anybody else hereabout, and could tell me if he were still to be consulted. Dear me, what was his name? But you know." "Not Conjuror Trendle," said her thin companion, turning pale. "Trendle, yes. Is he still alive?" I believe so," said Rhoda, with reluctance. "Why do you call him Conjuror?" "Well, they used to say he had powers other folk have not. Oh, how could my people be so superstitious as to recommend a man of that sort? I thought they meant some medical man. I shall think no more of him." Rhoda looked relieved, and Mrs. Lodge rode on. The milkwoman had inwardly seen, from the moment she heard of her having been mentioned as reference for this man, that there must exist a sarcastic feeling among the work folk that a sorceress would know the whereabouts of the exorcist. They suspected her then. A short time ago this would have given no concern to a woman of her common sense. But she had a haunting reason to be superstitious now, and she had been seized with a sudden dread that this conjurer Trendle might name her as the malignant influence which was blasting the fair person of Gertrude, and so lead her friend to hate her for ever, and to treat her as some fiend in human shape. But all was not over. 2 days after, a shadow intruded into the window pattern thrown on Rhoda Brooke's floor by the afternoon sun. The woman opened the door at once, almost breathlessly. "Are you alone?" said Gertrude. She seemed no less harassed and anxious than Brooke herself. "Yes," said Rhoda. "The place in my arm seems worse and troubles me," the young farmer's wife went on. "It's so mysterious. I do hope it will not be an incurable wound. I have again been thinking of what they said about Conjuror Trendle. I don't really believe in such men, and I should not mind just visiting him from curiosity, though on no account must my husband know. Is it far to where he lives?" "Yes, 5 miles," said Rhoda backwardly, "in the heart of Egdon." "Well, I should have to walk. Could you not go with me to show me the way, say tomorrow afternoon?" "Oh, not I. That is—" the milkwoman murmured, with a start of dismay. Again the dread seized her that something to do with her fierce act in the dream might be revealed, and her character in the eyes of the most useful friend she had ever had be ruined irretrievably. Mrs. Lodge urged, and Rhoda finally assented, though with much misgiving. Sad as the journey would be to her, she could not consciously stand in the way of a possible remedy for her patron's strange affliction. It was agreed that, to escape suspicion of their mystic intent, they should meet at the edge of the heath, at the corner of a plantation which was just visible from the spot where they now stood. Chapter 5. Conjuror Trendle. By the next afternoon Rhoda would have done anything to escape this inquiry, but she had promised to go. Moreover, there was a horrid fascination at times in becoming instrumental in throwing such possible light on her own character as would reveal to be something greater in the occult world than she had ever herself suspected. She started just before the time of day mentioned between them, and half-hour's brisk walking brought her to the southeastern extension of the Egdon tract of country, where the fir plantation was. A slight figure, cloaked and veiled, was already there. Rhoda recognized, almost with a shudder, that Mrs. Lodge bore her left arm in a sling. They hardly spoke to each other, and immediately set out on their climb into the interior of the solemn country, which stood high above the rich alluvial soil they had left half an hour before. It was a long walk. Thick clouds made the atmosphere dark, though it was only as yet early afternoon, and the wind howled dismally over the hills of the heath, not improbably the same heath which had witnessed the agony of the Wessex king's Ina, presented to the after ages as Lear. Gertrude Lodge talked most, Rhoda replying with monosyllabic preoccupation. She had a strange dislike of walking on the side of her companion where hung the afflicted arm, moving round to the other when inadvertently near it. Much heather had been brushed by their feet when they descended upon a cart-track, beside which stood the house of the man they sought. He did not profess his remedial practices openly, or care anything about their continuance, his direct interests being those of a dealer in furs, turf, sharp sand, and other local products. Indeed, he affected not to believe largely in his own powers, and when warts that had been shown to him for cure miraculously disappeared, which it must be owned they infallibly did, he would say lightly, "Oh, I only drink a glass of grog upon him. Perhaps it's all chance," and immediately turn the subject. He was at home when they arrived, having in fact seen them descending into his valley. He was a grey-bearded man, with a reddish face, and he looked singularly at Rhoda the first moment he beheld her. Mrs. Lodge told him her errand, and then with words of self-disparagement he examined her arm. "Medicine can't cure it," he said promptly. "'Tis the work of an enemy." Rhoda shrank into herself and drew back. "An enemy? What enemy?" asked Mrs. Lodge. He shook his head. "That's best known to yourself," he said. "If you like, I can show the person to you, though I shall not myself know who it is. I can do no more, and don't wish to do that." She pressed him, on which he told Rhoda to wait outside where she stood, and took Mrs. Lodge into the room. It opened immediately from the door, and as the latter remained ajar, Rhoda Brooke could see the proceedings without taking part in them.